I'm David Betancourt. I spend a lot of time in the Gilded Age mansion. The house is called Belcourt. It's off the famous Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island. Built for a divorced bachelor in 1895, it has been recently restored and has a fascinating history. We jump into the 1950s here at Belcourt with the help of longtime resident Dame Harle Tinney. Harle married into the family that owned this house starting in 1956, and she lived here for many, many years. Let's get into it. You come to the house in
1960. I was 19 years old. Emma Belden, who was my voice teacher and had been in the Philadelphia Opera, her story is a fascinating one. And her students were well accepted everywhere. That story is another one that I'd love to be able to tell someday. But Emma Belden knew Ruth Tinney because she had given concerts here at Belcourt in 1957 and 1958. Her accompanist was Miksha Merson, who was the teacher to Countess Sapari when they were little kids at the Breakers. He was the official musician to Countess Shoshani at the Breakers. And Emma and Miksha were very much in love, but she had an elderly aunt and uncle that she had to take care of, so she had to give up her career in the Philadelphia Opera, where she was a prima singer there and did all the arias and had an absolutely magnificent voice. She came to Newport and was a teacher, and I learned how to speak and how to sing from her. And so I came to a concert here, one of her concerts. And then I went over to her birthday party, which happened to be the same birthday as Miksha Merson on July 12th. And I was invited to their birthday parties, and I saw Donald Tinney for the first time, introduced, and how do you do? And Emma was very close to the Tinney family because she had done recitals here. And Belcourt is the perfect place for music. I mean, every room in this house is fabulous for music. And the Tinneys loved having the concerts, and all of the summer colony came. Countess Shoshani came, Countess Sapari came, etc., while they were in Newport. So that was how I was introduced to this side of the water, because I lived on the other side of the water in Middletown.
What did Donald look like the first day you met him, remember?
He weighed about 130 pounds, 6'1" tall, and very handsome.
Like a tall drink of water.
He was the most good-looking bachelor in Newport at the time. When the Tinneys moved to Newport, Donald Tinney, who was shy.
Yeah, I was going to say, he seemed to me quiet, reserved.
He was an artist.
A few words.
And he was private school educated. He went to St. Dunstan's School, Episcopalian, dressed beautifully when he was out in public. When he was home, he liked working on furniture and collecting antiques and doing restorations.
How did he get into that?
How did he get into that?
Yeah, how did he just start
No.
working in antiques?
You have to start with his father and mother. Harold and Ruth Tinney were married in Charlemont, Massachusetts on the 31st of August, 1929. Does that ring a bell? With an incident that happened only a few days later, like
yes,
the Great Crash.
Depression, yes.
And they both had a job after they were married. Ruth had given up her farm where she had 10 cows that she milked and was a very hard-working, quote, farmerette. And Harold came along for haying season because they had 300 acres and the three women couldn't do all the haying, so they hired a man, and Harle Tinney was the right one, and then they got married a few years later.
And only one child.
They had
Donald.
only one child, yes. When my book Ruthie comes out, which it's this morning, I got the
proof?
first proof.
Wow, very cool.
I mean, it's all coincidental, but I will read it again. And her life and Harold's life started, but they were farmers. They owned lots of land. And I remember my mother-in-law and father-in-law listening to Donald. He had a collection of antiques. When he was 12, he bought a chair, which I still have. And then he bought a suit of armor. And that suit of armor, the little one that you have still, has a history for Donald Tinney. He wanted that suit more than anything. He was only maybe 14, 15 years old, but he had to have that suit of armor. And the family, of course, said, well, if you restore this caned settee, when you finish it, we'll buy that suit of armor, because that we will do. We're going to sell the settee. Well, he couldn't wait. And he hated caning ever since then, because he had to spend all his days doing that by hand, caning, and he got it done. And then he found out the suit of armor was at the railroad station in Pawtucket, and he just had to have that suit of armor. Finally, the family got their car together, and they went over and picked up that suit of armor, and that began Donald's armor collection.
Armor collection that we have here at the house. That's
Yes.
all Donald's
Yes.
love for armor
Well, his love for anything
that he could restore.
that one might understand that Newport in the 1940s was a Navy town. And by 1947, the war was over, and the mansions were being torn down as fast as they could possibly tear them down, because nobody had servants anymore. The First World War had ended the servant problem, or the servant condition, because the young men all went to war, and you couldn't hire them. So Donald said, we need a bigger house. His furniture collection had taken so much of their colonial living room that the dog couldn't turn around in the aisles. They had a Dalmatian named Duke. So Brother Blaise Drayton, another fabulous influence on the Tinney family, was the only one of the Cistercian monks at the Cumberland Monastery that could talk. They were silent monks. But their property, the monastery, was backed up to the Tinney's property. They had 28 acres there, and the border was called 9 Men's Misery, because back in the colonial days, the Native Americans had buried 9 men and not fed them or taken care of them, and allowed them to be eaten to death by mosquitoes. So they called it 9 Men's Misery.
Yeah, I heard that legend.
And that was kind of haunted. And you know how little kids are. Donald was a little kid, and he used to go over there and play in that area. And they woke up every morning to the chanting of the monks. But in 1950, which happened to be the same year that Donald graduated from St. Dunstan's at the age of 16, the monastery burned. And Gamino bought lots of acres up in Spencer, Massachusetts, and the monastery moved to Spencer. And Brother Blaise, who had bought a lot of antiques from the Tinneys and who had them as the major restorers of some of the pieces, got to know the Tinneys very well and saw the Cumberland living room full of European antiques, along with the early American. And Donald wanted to see Europe's Newport, so Brother Blaze knew everybody in Newport and arranged for the police chief, Dugan, to give them a tour of all of the mansions in Newport that were not open anyway, but Blaze knew all of the caretakers, and of course the police chief did too. So they saw every single mansion.
All the properties.
All of the properties, and they went into all of them. They were for sale, but they were mostly ready to be torn down. The one that the Tinneys really wanted was the Arthur Curtis James estate, which was Beacon Hill. Mm. And that had 150 acres.
Oh, wow.
The Blue Garden.
That's not around today, is it?
No, there's 14 houses on there now. Well, but Arthur Curtis James owned the biggest yacht in the harbor called the Aloha, and his wife ran a very tight group of servants, but by the 1920s, there were no servants, and I'm not sure when he died, but I know that when Mrs. James died, the estate, they had no heirs, and they left the estate to the Sisters of Cluny. And I always wondered, because they were members of Trinity Church, they wanted to give the estate to the Episcopal Church, but the Episcopals didn't want it. And so Bishop McVinney was happy to have it, and Sisters of Cluny. The same thing happened with Oka Court. Oka Court was the Ogden Goulet estate that was actually the biggest house except for the breakers in Newport, but they were all built on the same footprint. If you look at Richard Morris Hunt's designs, you'll see that these three houses, Oka Court, Belcourt, and the breakers, have the same footprint. But from the outside, they don't look like the same place.
Yeah.
But the actual layout is the same. Many, many craftsmen that Richard Morris Hunt had connections with. And he also had connections in France, and so he knew the craftsmen. Timing is everything. Timing is everything. Napoleon III took over France. Richard Morris Hunt had done the Louvre for Napoleon III and was very ensconced in France, but then there was a uprising or whatever, and Napoleon III was deposed, and Richard Morris Hunt decided to come to America, which was his homeland. He was born in Vermont.
Yeah.
But his business was in France.
Let's go back to a second. So you meet Donnie, then you come here. You start working here?
Well, actually, 65 years ago, I came here to the interview with Ruth Tinney, almost to the day. You know.
Oh my goodness.
It was in the April vacation. And they gave me the job of being a tour guide. I said, I can't speak in public. I'm afraid of all of this. I'm a scientist. I want to be a doctor. I want to study biology and chemistry and do that. Now, Donald was not here that day that I had the interview with Ruth Tinney, or at least I don't remember him being here.
Yeah.
But the concerts that happened with Emma Belden and whatever, when I got back, my school year ended in the middle of May. So I had 2 weeks before I started work here on the 1st of June and had to learn the tour. The Tinneys knew everything. They didn't have anything in writing that I could read. So I took notes.
So
And
that you went on their tours and listened to them?
I listened mostly to Donald, and he was so knowledgeable. He knew everything.
Were they living in the main part of the house then?
No, they were living in the south wing,
Okay.
which had heat.
Mhm.
That's when they bought Belcourt.
So this side did not have heat?
No, this is absolutely elegant. Fire. We used to have to carry 6-foot logs up here if we wanted a fire.
Yeah, I was going to say a wood
And our-
fire in this
and our
massive
staff
fireplace would be.
Would start a week before the event and bring stacks of wood up here in garbage barrels, and 2 of them carry them up the stairs
Huh.
so that the wood fire would last.
Do you remember any part of that original tour?
Yes, I took notes, and I still have those notes.
Cool.
I took notes on 3 by 5 cards, and actually, the inventory that I have
Mm.
started from those notes.
Huh.
And the history of each piece and the history of the original pieces
Yeah.
that were here. And Donald knew everything.
Huh.
But he also knew a lot about the history. But then, since I was a dunce in European history, that was not my favorite subject at all. In fact, it's the only subject that I really didn't do well in school was history. I was good in science and music and all kinds of things, but history, yeah. But once I got involved in looking at the objects, Donald's approach to this house was from the craftsmanship and not the ownership. They didn't even know that Oliver Belmont built this house when they came here. And
It didn't matter to them.
it was not
They were
important.
infatuated with how the house was built.
It was the craftsmanship that was important.
Huh.
And the 300 people who worked on this house, and the architecture and the variety of the architecture in Belcourt, which is so different from the other houses, which have a more consistent architecture.
Sure.
Marble House, however, has the Gothic room, which has been nicely restored now by the Preservation Society.
Yeah.
But at the time when the Tinneys bought Belcourt, Marble House was owned by the Prince family, who only lived there a little time out of the year. This was a summer place. Belcourt was a summer house. Nobody came here after the maybe one weekend in October when they needed the fireplaces.
Yeah.
This place was closed down. Bellevue Avenue in 1950s, when we would drive down here was a patchwork of well-kept estates and dilapidated, boarded-up mansions.
Huh.
It was, and there were no street lights, and at night it was frightful when the street was full of potholes, and it was not the Bellevue Avenue that you see today by any means.
Huh.
And nobody wanted any of the mansions. Most mansions could be bought at that time for $15,000.
Crazy.
The most expensive one was the James Estate, and they wanted $45,000.
The Tinneys bought this for?
$25,000.
Earlier, I asked you about your first impression of Donald Tinney. What was your first impression of Belcourt? You remember?
I actually remember the concert that I came to, Emma Belden's concert. And after the concert, Donald Tinney came down the grand stair with Benny Colleen's niece, beautiful girl, and was at the School of Design. And I was heartsick for no reason. jealous as heck. And I didn't even know it. Donald, I had only met him twice, once at the yacht club at her birthday party. And I didn't know him really at all until actually I got to give tours here.
Yeah.
He was the one that taught me tours. And after a month or whatever, he asked me to marry him. And I said no.
That soon?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I said, well, I can't because I have to finish my education.
Wow.
And
Well, good for you. Did you finish your education?
No. No, that was my father had made up the mind that I was too young to get married, so he told me, you can't work at Belcourt anymore.
Oh, no.
In August, he said, no, you're going to be a doctor, so I'm getting you a job at Roger Williams Hospital in the morgue.
Oh, well, sounds like a fun job.
It was, and it was...
Oh, so you did it. You worked in the morgue?
I worked in the morgue for about 2 weeks, no, maybe a month.
Must have been quiet.
Well, it was an education. If I was going to be a doctor...
What did you do in the morgue?
I was testing blood, doing blood counts, and making slides, and doing that in the the blood lab and the morgue and all of that were in the same room in the basement of Roger Williams Hospital at the time.
Huh.
And it was hot down there. They had no cooling system.
Jeez.
We're talking.
So how did you get back to
1960.
Belcourt then?
Well,
You were taken from here. Your
how did I
father's
get back to Belcourt?
love. Love couldn't keep you away.
Basically, Donald and I could not talk. I couldn't communicate with him. He couldn't communicate with me.
Oh, no.
Donald had enough to do restoring Belcourt. But finally, when I changed schools, I went from Albion, Michigan, to my father's alma mater. It was Pembroke at the time, but Brown University, and he was very happy to have me closer to home where he could watch me,
Yeah.
so
keep an
that
eye
I
on you.
wouldn't do anything. So while I was at Pembroke,
Under his careful watch.
I called Donald, and we started seeing each other in every chance that I got, but usually it was after the lab course that I had at Brown, comparative anatomy. So my hands and elbows were all in this formaldehyde. But that was
So you
the
make
only...
your way back here.
What?
So you make your way back here? And he
Not
asked you to-
really, no.
No?
They'd come to Providence, and Donnie and I would talk for a couple of hours, and then they'd drive back. But it was
Huh.
all of these with his father and mother.
Huh.
They were as a family, but my father-in-law and mother-in-law would either go out to eat, or they might drive to Cumberland and see some of their old friends there. And they knew a lot of the people in Providence as well. So we had maybe 2 hours together, possibly, at the most, because I had a curfew. I had to be back in West House by, I think, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, something like that.
Huh.
So, and they had a long drive home. You have to know, in those days, getting from Newport to Providence
Not an
was
easy task.
a long drive. It
Sure.
was an hour and a half. However, we did it for a little while. Then came the day before Thanksgiving, 1960, and the Tinneys invited me to stay overnight here, and I said, well, I can do that because my father and mother won't know, but I have to be home for Thanksgiving because that's where it is. Anyway, Donald put the ring on my finger and said, "Will you marry me seriously?" And I said
Wow.
yes.
Here at Belcourt, this
Here,
happened.
right in front of the armor, when it was over there in the ballroom here. He gave me the ring. And I wanted to be married, but I really wanted to go to school. I was divided until my father called a lawyer and said, "She's too young to get married." That's where the state law comes in. You're not 21, your father owns you.
Wow.
So my father
There's the charter again.
took me to the lawyer, and the lawyer said, "Well, Donald is going to be arrested for kidnapping."
What?
Yeah. He was going to be arrested for kidnapping, which is a life imprisonment if he's found guilty.
Oh, no.
And you can't testify because you're too young. If your father doesn't give you permission
Oh,
to
no.
testify,
Now, how old is Donald at this time?
he was 26
But you were 19.
and I was 19. I mean, by all standards, that's
They're
kind
adults.
of normal. But Cornelius C. Moore, I want somebody to do history of Cornelius, Connie Moore. His office is still Moore, Vergadamo, Boyle, and Lynch. And but no one has written a biography of Cornelius C. Moore. However, he had a heck of a lot to do with the history of Newport because he was the only lawyer that the summer colony trusted. And he owned
He represented you in this case?
No, he
kidnapping?
represented my father.
Oh, no.
I couldn't get a lawyer. I was too young to have a lawyer.
So what happens?
So what happened was Connie Moore, when we were all together, my mother and my father, and he said, "I'm going to have Donald Tinney arrested for kidnapping." I said, "Why?" "Well, because he took you over the state line." Going from Providence to Newport goes through Massachusetts, and there was no other way of getting
because
to
95,
Providence.
right? This is before 95.
Before
South.
95 was built, but even
So
with
you've got
95,
you've got to go 20 over
you
to
go over
Fall
the
River.
Mount Hope
Okay.
Bridge, and
So
then
the-
when you go through Warren, you go through Swansea and
So not only did he kidnap you, he kidnapped you across state lines.
that was the whole thing. If we hadn't gone across the state line, there would have been no crime.
Well, there was no crime anyway.
Well, there was no crime. However, my father was about to have Donald arrested for the rest of his life and put in jail for kidnapping because the lawyer told him he could do that.
Yeah.
And that he had the right to lock me in a closet until I was 21.
Oh, my God.
Not that my father would have done that because
Yeah.
that's not, but he just wanted me to follow his dream for me, being a doctor. So that was the day before Thanksgiving. Had Thanksgiving at home, and
Are you wearing the ring on Thanksgiving?
I had it around my neck on a chain under my sweater.
I bet.
I didn't put it on, but I showed it to my friends at Brown University and talked to them. I said, "I have this dilemma. I really want to be married, but I don't want to be married now. I want to finish school." But I couldn't, I had no rights. I was not a human being. I was a female that was 19 years old, and there were no such things as child advocates at that time. There was no such thing.
Basically, your parents were forcing you to wait at least until you were 21. Then you could do whatever you wanted.
Right, but that I wouldn't be able to see Donald during that period. So I finally told my parents that I was engaged and that I was planning on going back to school and waiting, and Donald was happy with that. And my father went back to the lawyer and said, no, arrest him. Put him in jail for kidnapping. So I went back to the lawyers with my parents, and the lawyer took me aside by myself, and he said, you have one choice. Either he goes to jail for the rest of his life or you marry him. Once you're married, you're the possession of your husband. So I had one day to decide. It wasn't a difficult decision. The rest is history. But we were married on December 2nd, and the only way we could manage it, I stayed here at Belcourt that night, December 1st, and we could get married in Fall River because Massachusetts didn't have that Rhode Island law, and a woman had to be 18 to make her decision.
So you get married in Massachusetts?
I got married in the old in the old Fall River City Hall, which was a beautiful granite building.
Yeah.
And they tore it down after we got married, literally. But anyway, that day of December 2nd, the Tinneys drove me to Tiverton, and I got a taxi cab in Tiverton to take me to Fall River over the state line, thinking that, and my father did a lot of things to get our marriage annulled, including going to the church and the Bishop of Rhode Island, the Episcopal Bishop. And
So needless to say, your father wasn't at your wedding.
yes, he was.
Oh, he was.
Not at the first wedding. The
So
wedding in Fall
December
River.
2nd, 1960, you go to Fall River, and it's just you and Donald.
Well, my mother-in-law and father-in-law,
Okay.
Nellie, they were the witnesses.
Okay, so now you're married on December 2nd, 1960.
Yep. And I moved into Belcourt. Emma Belden and the Tinneys, we had our wedding dinner at the Hotel Viking, which was at that time the only hotel in town, believe it or not.
Huh.
And Emma Belden was a part of it, and we had a nice dinner, and we were married, and I felt safe. I wasn't safe before, but I knew that after I called my parents and I told them we were married, they say my father went limp, and my mother was crying, and they were very unhappy.
Huh.
And my sister was devastated because I couldn't even talk to her. That was a decision that I have to live with the rest of my life, because now I'm at Tinney, now I'm here at Belcourt, and my life is going to be different. I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm not going to be the Methodist minister I wanted to be. I'm not going to do any of my dreams. It's all Donald's dreams now, and I will dedicate my life to Donald's dreams, which I did.